Hi, everyone. I am there. Now we see. I'm Tracy Cheney, and this talk is going to be on creativity in developing it and maintaining it in our children. Some of it will be aimed at school teachers as far as what happens in the classroom when we switch from the typical topics that we're covering, the subjects, the way the class is set up, and we switch to a project based to create nurture creativity and give our kids a chance to work in a different way. But it's also good information for parents because so often those creative projects are sent home for you to do, for you to manage. And then it changes the dynamic with your child also. So I think it's good to have this information. I am going to give a lot of information in this presentation. So if you want to take notes while I'm getting screen share, go ahead and get a notebook and paper. And let's see, I keep thinking it's going to be here. Let's see where it is. Let's see if I've captured it. No, I did not. There it is. All right. And now let me get into slide share mode. All right. So the topic today is the importance of creativity in the age of accountability. And the reason I've called it this is there are two very different ideas that we've got going on in education in the US here. And we'll talk about both aspects of that. So first of all, I want to assure you that this is not a talk about me trying to turn your child or you into a professional artist. We're actually looking at creativity and the importance that it plays in our lives, but also in the US economy and why we really need to make sure that our kids are very versed in this. So thank you very much for joining me on a topic that is important to your child. Our kids, especially our younger kids, live in their creative thinking, and we need to see that's where they are and work with them, because it takes a long time to learn how to read and write, but we don't want to lose this other important aspect of their thinking that they were born with. I've had a lot of experience in this, having taught in 3 states in 14 schools. I love it, and it has been my soapbox for the last 40 years. So one of the things, you know, if I say creativity or say art or something like that, you have a reaction to it. And so we're wanting to be aware of that as you, the adult in charge of this, that because you may have some negative feelings in this area, that you're not cutting your child off. And we're going to see what an important part this plays in their thinking. So I'd like to start off by defining creativity, and we use it interchangeably with imagination. So I'm going to separate those out just a little bit here. So talking about creativity is, if we think about it, connecting different ideas. And this is a really important concept. This happens all the time in industry and in, business. All kinds of ways that we take different ideas, maybe from totally different subject matters, and put them together. And we see that I have Gutenberg here because he transformed the world by using a press. The press already existed. He didn't invent it, but it was used for stamping coins. But the idea of taking a little piece of individual type and being able to rearrange those and being able to print was a monumental idea. And the importance that in that society they placed on being able to read and making a literate populace. And what were they reading? The Bible. Not an easy task, but it was expected that the common person would be able to read this important, piece of work within their ideology, and that you would be able to read it yourself and not have to have an intercession or have it in a language that you didn't understand. They put that much importance on it. The second picture I have represents Apollo 13. If you've ever seen that movie, there is a point where the spacecraft is in trouble. And we have very intelligent, smart people. And it's just amazing. They got that into the air, and that they were able to communicate. I mean, phenomenal. But they ended up having to use what the astronauts had on board, just everyday simple stuff, and use it in a totally different way and put them together to be able to bring that mission home. So if you watch that movie, that section there is just creativity at work. And the last picture here, Reese's Pieces. I mean, who would have thought of putting chocolate and peanut butter together and making a phenomenal snack that I still enjoy today? So what we want to see, and your kids are actually doing this. If you watch your child playing with blocks or stuffed toys, how they create and put things together, great imagination, creativity at work. So it's very important that our kids, we understand what the creative process is and how to access it. Because the important thing here is tolerating ambiguity. Because when people start off, certainly see it in science, even in cooking, you're putting things together. Not sure how it's going to turn out. We, in that process of not knowing how things are going to turn out, we don't want to abandon it, that it's too hard or we can't do it. What we want to teach is working through that. And that, oftentimes our first ideas don't pan out. I love this quote. All right, so let's talk about imagination. And who I think about, Walt Disney, with his Department of Imagineers. And it was just wide open. Whatever you can think of, we will bring it to life. We'll use the visual language and we'll use engineering. We'll use all of that to make it possible. So imagine having a job like that. So one of the things that we, in talking about the creator economy, and you maybe have heard of the maker economy. People are wanting to make things. So we were in the information age, but now you have all of that in the palm of your hand, everything that's known in the palm of your hand. So you don't have to go seeking it so much as we want to know how we want it. This is a how-to kind of moment. And I think about Einstein, oh my gosh, that he actually was thinking his way to the to his great theory of relativity. I mean, thinking his way to it. All right, so I want to share this graph with you and kind of work through it. We see aspects of it and it is still used. Whoops, my slide is kind of wonky down here. We still use it to criticize schools. But, this was done in the 70s and early 80s before screens ever came along. But let's look at what it is. Back when we were involved with the moonshot, and now, we've gone to Mars and put rovers on Mars and working just incredibly in space, NASA was doing a lot of hiring, and they invited a couple of psychologists to put together a test that they could administer to applicants and see if they were going to be a fit for NASA. So they had 8 different tests. Well, these guys got the idea of, let's just administer this to some little kids. And these were kids in a Head Start programs. So that tells you right there that those kids didn't have access to a lot of resources. And so they just wanted to see what they would find out. And what they found out was that those kids were at the genius level. 98% of them were at the genius level in being able to create in these divergent ways of thinking that seemed so hard for adults. Wow, the kids had it. So they turned this into quite the study. Same kids took the same test 5 years later when they were between 8 and 10. So they were in the elementary school years. And they found that level of genius had dropped dramatically. And 5 years later, when they were teenagers, they gave the exact same test again. And wow, the drop was significant. But by 1983 and onward, that test had been given to 200,000 adults who, look at our tiny, tiny little genius level. So what happens? Now, we could say it's a failure of the schools, but I think there's so much more going on here, and that's why I really wanted to unpack this with you. Okay, now my slide is not moving. Well, why is that? There we go. Okay. So this quote from Thomas Edison, pretty interesting. Because isn't he the one that, people will say, oh, he failed 999 times, or is it, going up to 9,999 times, not making a light bulb. But what he found was, no, it was 999 ways of not making a light bulb, what it took to get there. And that's what we really want our kids to be able to be persistent about. But what I've heard in the schools in the last certainly decade is that thinking is getting harder. Now, is that because of being on technology, on screens, on playing, just hours and hours of gaming? And the same time, school indeed has gotten harder. So we have just an enormous amount of content to present. And yeah, it's all much harder than we ever had going to school. First grade was pushed down into kindergarten in the mid-2000s. So we are expecting 5-year-olds to be able to write sentences. So teachers can't do a lot about all of that, right? But we are under pressure, constant pressure, to want to make sure that they're going to do well on state tests. So we have this age of accountability, and everything, your school rating, your teacher evaluation is going to be dependent on that. And it's been decided, it wasn't our choice, but what we are going to test is what we value. And so a great deal of pressure is put on that. And the things, so much of what school is about is teaching those subjects. Yes, they're important subjects, and it takes a long time to learn how to read and to do math. That all takes a long time. But it's thinking that, coming to the one right answer. And the way that we administer that, and because of time constraints and everything else, we are really not working in the thinking mode that children are best at, which is their creative thinking mode. Dear Dr. Seuss. So let's look at right brain, left brain. I know you've heard of those things. So, our thinking is more than just right brain, left brain. It's a whole lot going on. But there was a lot of studies done in the 1970s when they started really studying the brain. And an art teacher, Betty Edwards, took that information and it applied it to teaching art. And, now everybody talks about this and feel like they really understand all of what the implications of this is. So we need both. The left brain modality is not really about original thought. It is a lot. You can copy patterns. I can teach you how to do this. There is the one right answer. You will get this result. And this is what we test for on those subjects. Now, you need to have that information because to turn it into something and do something with it, you need to know your subject matter well. So this is not it really shouldn't be an either or situation. And so, kids spend 6 hours a day with us working to develop these left brain subjects. And all of this stuff that we're doing, me even talking to you, that's very, very precise. And it's also very verbal. But I want to say, if you see how these two modalities are very different, this is why you cannot talk on your cell phone, everybody, while driving. Because driving is a right brain activity. You are judging spaces and distances And when you're talking and having to be very precise and listening to somebody, you're kind of going blind around the edges here. The right brain modality and thinking that way, it's nonverbal. And it can see the whole picture. That's why you have to have your full attention on your driving and the other things that we're going to talk about. So school is very good at teaching so many ways of being able to do well at the things that we are asking kids to do, that we're going to test them on, that everything is riding on. And school is great at that. However, what kids are, where their thinking is, especially coming into school, where they do not have any analytical sense. That all will get developed later. It comes out around 4th grade. We are not addressing where they are thinking. But as they spend more time, in getting good at these particular subjects, how to do imaginative work gets elusive, and they don't know how to access ideas, whereas they were just constantly immersed in that for 6 or 7 years of their life. So I'll see kids sitting at their table and they're not doing anything, and it's like, what are you doing? Well, I'm waiting for an idea of what to do. You can't do that. Get the pencil in hand and start doodling, because that's how you're going to access this. So doodling, very, very important. And look at the proliferation of adult coloring books, right? It feels good. We need this other aspect of ourselves. So we pay attention to creativity because we can feel it. And I know that you've experienced this in so many ways. And isn't it interesting? It's like when you can kind of let go of things, like in the shower, you're taking a while. Oh, you finally get the answer that you were thinking about. And what we love in little children is their complete alignment of being in the present, right? They are not worried about the past. They are not even conceiving of the future. Time does not exist for them. Oh, that is such a nice place to be, right? But you're trying to get them, that's not school. We've got 45-minute periods and you've got to be on your way and you've got to get this done. And I do tell kids, in the art room that yes, we are in school and we do have a definite deadline and they do need to make a choice. And that's so much of what creativity is about, is just making choices. Sometimes it doesn't work out and we need to learn how to deal with that. It's, the creative process is making choices along the way. And well, artists, you will see them spending years on the same topics, just tweaking it as they're working through those issues. And that's a really good skill to have. And it feels great when you can actually do it. So talking about artists, with Picasso, his dad was a great art teacher. So he had all the skills, but he also had, yes, he had the artistic skills, but he also had a thought process that went along with it. And he could have made a great living at age 18 doing portraits. He was, so talented, but he rejected all that. He went through years of poverty and also struggling to figure out what it is that he wanted to say in the visual language. But what he spent his time doing is trying to get back to that point where small children are, where their thinking is, where their drawing is, because he saw the beauty in it. So being creative is doing. It's an active thing that you are doing. And we are problem solving always, whether you are working on something that breaks in your house and you're trying to figure out, how could I do that? How could I solve that? There you are, right there in that mode of thinking. And we mentioned cooking, that is a constant give and take. Trying to you try a little bit of this seasoning, a little bit of this, and it may go right, it may not go right. I have had plenty of disasters. But what we want to teach kids is right here, that it is not a failure in the creative process. You're getting feedback. Now, it's really hard to talk with kids, especially girls that have got school all figured out and really love those top grades, and then they're not good in this field because they haven't practiced. Oh my. And you have to be so careful, and just think about that for yourself. I hear often, oh, my teacher said this or that about my art, and it is so tied to our emotions and to our soul. And that comment reverberates for years, if not forever, and can cause you, and it's such a shame, but it can cause you not to do the things or the career that you should have. So what we need to teach kids, and that's what, I work with them on, is we're talking about the work, not you. What does it need? Letting the work speak to you to make the changes. And if we can get that separation for the kids, they'll have a much better time about working in this. We can actually get totally paralyzed by I don't know what to do, which is a procrastination and writer's block, kind of part of that anxiety of, I don't know what to do. I'm waiting for that idea to strike, when we need to just do something, even if it's making notes or making a list, something. Activate your eye-hand coordination, and that is developing all of these synapses working. So you need to do something, okay? Now, it's a whole nother talk here to talk about, the creative processes that artists use in working their way through visual problems. That's another talk, because we could spend a long time on that. But I'm just wanting you to get a sense of kind of the basics here. So if we as teachers and parents think about 4 elements of creativity, we can actually impact this pretty positively and keep this going for our kids. I'm going to just say something right here about this. So I do not like grading children's art, and I don't really think it should be. But in the age of accountability, having to do rubrics and lay everything out, and yes, they need to, know what you were saying. It's true. Okay. So, the kids that are really pushing on, I've got to have an A, I've got to have an A. So it's right here, because you can do everything I said, including in this project. Awesome. But what I want you to think about is now turning it into something that you are doing, something fun. I love it when kids who have a good sense of humor can infuse that into their art piece. Awesome. We need to, take it beyond just a copying exercise. And I am not one that has kids copy famous artists. That's art and appreciation, and there is certainly value in that, and learning how artists did that. And yes, that's how artists learn, by copying in museums. But for me, that artist is at the height of their powers, and they have spent years and years and years experimenting and working things through. And who are we just to copy that? The kids actually need to start that process for themselves. And when we get there, it does feel great, right? Boy, when we finish something, it may not have turned out at all what we were thinking. You can relax about that. If you have time to go after it again, great. If not, it's like, wow, I got it finished. And that's the important thing. So let's look at what happens as kids are developing the visual language, which actually comes before they are really fully verbal. And starting around 2, 3, when the kids are starting to reach for that pencil and reaching for that crayon, give it to them. They are doing something that is normal and natural, and this is part of getting ready for school, and they need to do it. They have miles of scribbling ahead of them. And the kids have to work through this themselves. And the problem is, by denying this, and because screens have gotten in the way, kids are not necessarily prepared for kindergarten. And they need to do all of this drawing. And the reason here, around 3, as I'm saying, is when they've done a lot of scribbling, and there's definite stages of scribbling that we can read and know where the kids are developmentally. But when you get to that point, that a symbol can stand for an idea, and I can teach somebody that is a huge leap in human consciousness. I equate it with the cave paintings. from 40,000 years ago. And you can see it. They just look at humans without any instruction, draw beautifully, but also being able to share that with others. Oh, and I just need to drop in this little thing. So when I had art history a gazillion years ago, we were taught that all those hands on the caves, that's men's, this is a ritual for hunting. Guess what? Just a few years ago, a researcher was there and looked at the structure of the hands and went, these are women's hands. Oh my gosh, does that change art history? We don't know what that was for now. So there went, I even wrote a long paper on the topic of hunting and the animals, and the bones we were finding were not the animals they were drawing. Guess what? Doesn't really have anything to do with it, I don't think. Okay, so what do you see when we get to the kindergarten classroom? It shows up in the drawings. And I love working with teachers and taking a class and having everybody draw the same thing. And then we lay them out, and you can do your reading groups right from that point. And we need the kids, see the kids that are not ready. And as much as we would love to skip it, and we do, and we're putting the cart before the horse and making kids write before they are ready, it'll be a struggle all the way through. So a teacher can see the range of kids in her classroom. In this case, these are 5-year-olds, 2 different 5-year-olds. We see one who's had a lot of coloring and all, and she saw a work a 5th grader was making and copied. So that ability to even copy off the board is a skill, right? 5-year-old, a 5-year-old who I'm looking at a struggle, feeling like he needs to do something well, already stressed, right? Does not have the experience. This drawing is, when we see 3s and 4s, and this is an older 5, still hasn't figured out, the hands and the proportion. This is no fault of the child. This is inexperience. Or we look at, has this child been on a lot of screens since they were little, because feeling like academics, they're going to get their ABCs, they're going to get all that. But that is an adult curated environment, a 2D environment. They are not participating in the 3D world around them. And this takes a little more, looking into. But I have to say, what just kills me in the elementary schools is seeing kindergartners flunk because they didn't get the drawing and stuff they needed when they were little before coming to school. And then we have cut art programs out of kindergarten. I have stories on that just make me crazy. Okay. They're not going to be able to, it'll show up even at the end of the year. As much as you want them to be able to get past this, they've got to put the drawing time in to be able to do it. So in elementary years, kids are going to be at various places, but what we really need to see, and you saw it with those 2 kindergarten drawings, kids need to draw first. They need to be at a certain place in their drawing, and then reading and writing come quite naturally. We can predict how it's going to go if we're paying attention. And as much as we wish we could hurry things up, can't. This is an internal thing within the child, and they just need to have materials. They don't need a 64 box of crayons. They just need some basic drawing materials. So we move along, and as we see more details in the kids' drawings, there's a couple of things that are going to happen. I already will start to hear from kids. These are young kids saying, I can't do this, I can't do this. And if it's an art teacher coming into the room, it kind of throws things into chaos. And that's why I wanted to talk to you about this. But at 5th grade, around age 10, so, when kids, they're going to come to it in different times, but there is a push on realism. And you may wish that they would be more abstract and more free like they were when they're little, but that's not where they are. So physically, depth perception, their eyes have now matured to where they are as an adult as far as the developments there. They can perceive depth better. That's they can catch balls better. Their coordination is there. But then the other thing that happens is now they can compare their work to adult work, which we have to stop that. But that's what happens. Like, mine isn't good, or my peers that are drawing and I am not. So they also find it hard because now they've had all these years, and language definitely does dominate. I mean, look at all the spelling and vocab, and the reading and the writing and, all of that is where they're have spent, years, and they don't necessarily have as much practice in the drawing. The other thing that happens is the analytical mind develops. And I mean, you may wish that it doesn't, but this is where we are as far as their brain development goes. And the girls who are, very analytical are like, don't look at my work, don't look at my work. And feeling like, I mean, they're closing down. And we're talking, this is young. This is too young to be doing that, but that is what happens. So they do need to have realistic drawing instruction to be able to move forward. Do we give it to them? Not unless you have an art teacher, seems like. Okay, so let's think about you, either you're a teacher watching this or a parent watching this, and where you feel your drawing ability is. And about, I would say, half of the population is stuck where they were in 6th grade. And the first thing when I am introduced is like the first thing out of people's mouth, oh, I can't even draw a stick figure. Well, actually, a stick figure is pretty good. Do not denigrate your ability wherever you are. It's kind of, you didn't get the instruction. And a lot of boys will keep on drawing because they're very driven on things that are very realistic, cars and trucks and rockets, and they kind of get through this. A lot of girls, think about yourself, are stuck in heart, rainbows and flowers. I know I did, my daughter, my granddaughter, and they had lots of art coming from grandma, and it's just kind of a natural thing. We can get past that. And if you're feeling like you're not creative and therefore it's kind of a fluff and it's not necessary, and you are making decisions for kids, or you're an administrator making decisions about everybody because you don't feel good about this and then you don't value it, you are cutting off kids from participating in the creative economy, which is a huge, multi-billion-dollar industry. So we need to keep this going. There is no reason to cut kids off from this. And I do want to talk about the kids that manage to go through, and, they are right brain kids. They often look different than the rest of the kids if they are totally into this art. And they've also come to the point that they have it within themselves. And they know that, it's going to take work, and they want to do it. And they will kind of have to step back sometimes from being in the middle of the, it just depends on the child. We want to protect this in them, and so they can actually move forward with it, but it will look different. And if you see that that's kind of where they're been able to keep that alive for themselves, well, let's do what we can to nurture it. A lot of kids will also feel so disconnected from the other school subjects that they are involved in. It's not them. They haven't grown to that yet. And maybe they won't. You hear creative people who say, I don't have any numbers in my head. And, this is where they live. It is going to be tough. I sat on at an alternative school on the board, and they were looking at what can we do to increase attendance, and just kind of walking through the classrooms one day, I was noticing, one, how many boys were there, and then how many boys drew really well. And what was that school just doing? Individual packets, and they're just doing the reading, the writing, the math, and not honoring. Well, if you just looked at all their doodling, you realize, oh, this is a lot of talent here. So at that school, they decided to put it in an art strand for those kids, and attendance increased to 98, 99%. What a difference, because you're teaching them where they are good, and they'll bring along that other stuff. So true, such a true quote. Okay, so parents, if you're not getting drawing during the school day, then it needs to be happening at home. And teachers, I realize it's, there's so much pressure on the time, and we need to see, though, that this is the balance. This is the other side of the child, and we don't want them to learn that. But the important thing to realize, especially with your younger kids, most of them are visual learners. but their teachers are not. And I love those teachers who are in, first grade, just excited about teaching kids to read, and they're on fire, and all the teachers that are on fire for their subjects that they love to teach. But often they aren't visual learners. And when I was doing my master's, then I looked at what's the percentage of administrators that are visual thinkers. It's like, but they are making the decisions about how we spend their school day, or it's the state, the education department for the state. Politicians are involved in all this day-to-day minutia who don't know anything about kids if you've not worked in a classroom. And we just can't lose fact of this is where the kids are, but it is so important for being able to feel successful about school. And the important thing about drawing and trying these things is losing your fear of being wrong. Now, when you're going after the one right answer, you either get the answer right in math or you don't, and you can keep correcting it, and people will teach you the strategies to get there, right? But the kids figuring this out on their own, what they think is working. Now, let's address the fact that a lot of our millennial parents and teachers have creative anxiety. And I know an art teacher in a charter school, it's a math, science, art charter school, having to ask permission just to even teach the color wheel. So it's just gotten so extreme, but that's kind of where we are. But our millennials were educated under No Child Left Behind, which kind of was dropped on all of us. I did teach in Texas and came to understand why you teach the test and all of that. And that's a whole nother topic. But it came with, the George Bush administration, and the idea that everything about you is going to be determined by this. And yes, you are taught to find that existing answer. And hey, I was on the parent committee that was wanting to make sure my millennial child had a computer lab. It wasn't 1-to-1. It was like 2 to 3 kids, on the computer. But now we're at 1-on-1 devices, even at kindergarten. So we really are rewiring young brains, but we're not sure. Our first digital natives, Gen Z, the tail end of that is, depending how you count these things, but, junior high age. And we were saying when they were coming in as, pre-K and kindergartners at the beginning of their generation, what to expect and what are we dealing with? And it's like, everybody, we don't know. And now we're kind of seeing as they're coming into the workforce, and we are spending time teaching kindergarten kids to code instead of drawing. So I want to talk about this creative anxiety in the classroom among the kids. So if you are a teacher that's feeling, I don't like this, because what's happening is you're shifting the dynamics in the class. And among your kids that are fine and do well in what you've got going, the classroom is set up for left brain type of subjects. And, you're going to know how much time you can give to spelling, and how much time we're going to spend reading, and how much time we're going to spend writing. And things are pretty orderly and quiet, and to be able to teach those things. So we going to flip it now. We switch to the other mode of thinking, and things can feel quite chaotic if you don't realize what's happening. So your kids who are like your math and science boys, I've had kids walk into a classroom, with art materials, and have third grade boys come up to me and say, I hate this, and I'm not good at this. I'm going, you're 8. How can you know if you're good at this or not? If I was spending all day with them, it would be a different situation. But they're feeling, I don't know what's going to happen. And that is very uncomfortable. And we're very young to be deciding that. So if you tell them exactly what to do, paint by number or something like that, they'll feel much better. But that's not what the skill we're working on. And a lot of times, because they don't draw and because they are spending time on the computer, their fine motor skills are not very developed. I really see this when you get up to 6th grade. and up to middle school with kids where they've had all these years, all this missed opportunity. And they're coming with weird ways of clutching the pencil. And I can't undo that in a 45-minute period. But because we're not putting any emphasis on cursive, because we don't teach it because we're not testing it. It is so tied to their fluidity and so tied to their success with that. And it is just agony. And it just is so upsetting for me to see that happen, because they know now, because they're critical, that their work does not match up. And it is such a struggle. And is that going to keep them from going into careers that typically boys, we talk about boys and their ability, their spatial intelligence to, with blocks and all the things that they like to play with. And are we keeping them from careers where that's an important part of the job? In engineering, in architecture. I've moved so many times in my life that you have the fellow who comes and looks at all your junk and can order the right size of moving van and get it all packed in beautifully. That's spatial intelligence at work. And I don't feel like we're paying attention to that with our boys. We have a segment of the girls, the A girls, the A+ girls who mastered school at kindergarten, and they have it figured out all the way because it doesn't change all that much, right? And if they haven't been practicing and they're not performing well on these occasional art experiences, they are very, very clingy and want you to do the work for them, or they're going to push to get a top grade because they don't get anything but A's. They really expect you to make their artwork look good in some way. And the reason I don't like teaching 9th grade art classes is because you have kids coming all the way through elementary and junior high with no drawing experience. Then we put them into a required art class that they're going to get a grade on. And that grade's going to count towards their college transcript. They are freaked out about this. Not fair. So when we're talking about boys and spatial intelligence, so much of school, they have had to give up the way that they learn best. And then our boys are very kinesthetic, and girls too, that are very kinesthetic learners. They're the ones that are up and down, and boy, recess is so important for them. And those kids can do very well in this project. So now where, the class has a striation to it, the gets flipped. And these kids can actually have a totally different relationship now with you and with their peers, because when they get the opportunity to shine, we need to really make sure they have that opportunity. That's why we really need to have these kind of things happening at school and not at home, where it becomes a parent-directed project. They need to have a chance to be at the top. So here's the really interesting group of kids. They are the artistic ones. Some of them, they'll be thrilled and they'll get busy and stuff, but there's another group that is like, they feel like they should be good. It's like, oh, finally. And then what happens? They can't deal with this. And by the end, it can just be tears. And it's just so sad for them because they're so frustrated because they know they should be good on this and they can't get it going. And they're erasing to perfection instead of being able to move on. So just need to pay attention to those kids and what's happening for them. And if they're having a breakdown, why they are feeling very anxious about this. So we know this is really important in our economy. And what is of concern is that other countries have figured out how to beat us. And it's in this area of innovation, that they can beat the US at innovation, which we have prided ourselves on because they've been changing their education system to address just what I've been talking about. Okay, so how are we killing it? And I don't want to take school as a negative. It's just that's how we are teaching school in, our country. This is where we feel, the push and the drive on it. And we only have so much time. I mean, I've been part of discussions saying, let's make the school day, even if we could make it 30 minutes longer, we could get in all of this important stuff. Or the school year. Well, sure, we'll take the school year longer, but we're not going to pay for it. So then you have teachers going, oh, okay, never mind on that. When you're giving projects, so if we can't define the problem for the kids, like giving them some parameters, because that's how creativity works. Like, okay, this is where the fence line is here, and you need to work within that. That will actually stimulate creativity. Now, especially if you're working with fifth graders who I feel are like little lawyers, they're always looking for the loopholes, but just hold firm on it. And they can have to think their way to making success here. And because of high stakes testing and because of grades and all of that, we have a huge fear of failure. And especially in a project that at this point, we're not doing a copy exercise, that can be very hard for kids. But our dependence, even at preschool, on worksheets and coloring books and tracing and not doing original work, all of that has an impact. So we've gotten to this point where it's just worksheets, worksheets, worksheets. That is not academic work, really, true academics. And I've seen it even at the nursery and pre-K level, where we're not giving the kids a piece of paper and having them draw things, but we're coloring in, some adult made image. And I thought the digital age meant we were going to get rid of copying, but it seems like quite the opposite. We have more. And we need to have student produced work. The more that it's generated by them, then the more we have an opportunity to have to problem solve and work these things out. So it's not just our eye-hand skills, but it is the type of thinking that we're going after. So, I think you would agree with me that school measures, very traditional abilities. And a lot of that, we are measuring, or we're teaching the subjects that we can measure. And girls tend to be good at reading and spelling. And I know that's a huge generality. But I feel like this has led to the notion that boys are not maturing as fast as girls. But actually, if we really look, especially you can see this in, the nursery and preschool, where we still have block play and all, you'll see that they're developing in very different ways. And you just think about your boy, and he can just be so focused for so long on the cars and those things. It's equally important, and they're equally developing, just in different ways. And if I had continued my PhD, this is where I wanted to put my focus, because I've noticed it for so many years and thought about it, and how in the space of time that I have to work with kids, can I plan things to address this? Okay. So putting pressure here on teachers. Why don't we provide it? Well, part of it is there's just not enough time. When we say you have to do, this amount of curriculum in each of these subjects, and it has to be done with Common Core, it's a stepping. So it was with No Child Left Behind. Okay, we come back and we review for, a quarter of the year to make sure everybody's got it before we could move on. But now it's like, no, we expect by third grade, you have learned these things. So then we go on to fourth grade. So there's not much downtime. Even if you wanted to, can you spare the time? And I have a confession. I was on the state team that wrote the standards for art in my state, and and they had to cover a whole lot of stuff. I couldn't get that covered in my school year, especially when, an administrator makes a schedule change that completely takes away time. So, I've experienced it in 2 schools where the kindergartners, the kids that need it the most that we were talking about, they're the ones that have their art time cut. So that I was seeing kids for, 90 minutes in 6 weeks. That was it. Can I really impact this? So I didn't have enough time. But in many schools, and I had an administrator say to me, well, the kids have 45 minutes a week, and that's plenty, and they don't really need anything beyond that. That's not true. As I hope that you are seeing, it's just as important and just as much side by side as all of our left brain subjects. We do have a lot of teacher-centered classrooms, which are geared to teaching the left brain topics, successfully. But we have gotten rid of, the little stations that would have art projects going on and all of that, even at the younger grades. I mean, the kindergarten having to toss out so much of that in favor of workbooks and, first grade topics have got to get covered. But I want to say to you as a teacher, you draw better than a 5th grader. You will get lots of strokes over this. So don't feel like, oh, I can't put myself out there. Here's the other thing in talking with parents, they had a hard time with was all of a sudden whiteboards started appearing in their jobs. And they were expected to get up and be able to draw what they're talking about to teams. Okay, that produced lots of anxiety. It's like, wow, I can't do it. And I'm not getting taught how to draw. And the whole point was communication and being able to use the visual language with communicating, but it's just kind of dropped on the workforce to be able to do that. So, you know how the kids feel, right? So don't feel anxious about this. The fact that you could spend any time with kids and working in this mode that they prefer, they will love you for that. And you've experienced this when you're doing something you love. And I have to say, when you go, even though women may say, oh, I can't draw, but creativity has to be expressed. And where I see it is at craft fairs. Unbelievable. I don't work in those ways, but I am so interesting how it's evolved and how complex things have gotten over the years. Wow, just in quilting even. Just fascinating. But doing something that you love, that where your talent really lies or that you want to try and it feels good. So we do need to make time for the creative process. And yes, I would love to take you through that in another talk. But if even at home, if the crayons are always out, there's a table. Now, when we were growing up, you just colored, and the little kids came and sat at the table and colored with the big kids, and we got ready for school, and it was very natural and normal, and that's what it should be. So we just want to have access to that, because the difference was we could have the TV on, but you could pay attention or not pay attention. You can get up and move around, but when you've got screens, that's something else. Now, the iPad was invented in 2010, so we've really only been in this massive change for 13 years. But it is changing how we're having to deliver education. So if you will even if you can have something in your classroom where projects can be taking place, doesn't have to be huge, but, we get good at what we practice. And we're just always just getting better. But if we're cutting kids off from this, they are not necessarily going to be doing it themselves if they feel there's a lot of judgment involved. So, at the beginning, I shared that graph of the first attempt to quantitate creativity, creative thinking. And there have been a gazillion tests that have been devised since then, and you could take lots of them online. But what I want to point out is that doesn't mean that that child will grow up being able to work in a creative endeavor, because we have to keep it alive and we have to nurture it just as much as we're doing the other subjects in school. So some of the things that you can do at home is just little mental games and conversation, just asking, keeping it fun for a variety. So we're thinking about flexibility and fluency and originality. So here are different ways that, we just are approaching mental agility, basically. It's also giving you conversation and input with your kids. And we want them to be able to get past their first idea. And some of the little games that you can play, like with preschoolers, if you're cooking, or, in the classroom, or, holding up what something is that they don't know and figuring out a lot of ways that it could be used. How fun is that? I mean, there are artists that just love playing with recycled junk, right? So they can have a great time with that. But when we were in elementary school, and my grandma liked to play cards with us. She had written like A, B, C, so flashcards with the letters on it. And we would play like, okay, it's all going to be names. So a letter would come down and you'd think of many names as you could. So, right, we're working on fluency. And then we'd change it to like, okay, all girls' names or all boys' names. So it would get harder and we'd really have to search for things. Or, we'd change to foods, or, you can play all these things with things that kids are interested in, like modes of transportation, something just as easy as that. That's why I'm saying this does not have to be huge. Those are things we can certainly have going on at school too. Now, for your junior high and adolescents, if we can get them to think about a different perspective, this is very good. And also we see, those really focusing on something that's of interest to them. That's awesome. So creativity tends to be, it's active and it can be messy. It can be frustrating, but this is a very important part of our thinking too. So I just want to say thank you for staying with me for this time. And I did write a book. Actually, it was for preschool teachers that I saw, coming out of the colleges. There's not a lot of this talked about, certainly not taught. And in education, I feel it really needs to be, mentioned at the preschool level, and working with teachers that just did not see the importance of this, even making, an art station not available, but not as well stocked, or that it was something like the sandbox you could or could not do. No, kids need to be doing this at this level every day. They need to be participating in this. And it's so fun and exciting and cool, because you are developing their thinking in the area that they are thinking in anyway. So if we can really keep this going in our children, I feel this moves us ahead in our country, in our economy, that is just vitally important. So again, thank you for considering this important topic with me. Yeah. And again, I'm Tracy Cheney. I am happy to speak to your group or to your school or to your college class about this, because I don't feel like there's a lot of us out there who have been in these positions, who get to see what happens over the course of a child's school lifetime and have that development. And if you've got somebody, grab them and talk to them and invite them to give their perspective on things that you can do to really nurture the creativity in our school kids. And have a wonderful week. And I think I'd look forward to hearing from you and seeing you again. And you can always reach me at my website, tracycheney.com.